So a few years ago, I did some training to become an intentional interim pastor. Now, an interim pastor, is a fill-in guy. Someone who fills in between the now and the past pastor and the next pastor. But an intentional interim pastor does a little more than that. An intentional interim pastor takes care of the flock, but in addition to that has some specific responsibilities. Here's a good definition. An intentional interim pastor's function goes beyond simply filling a pulpit. They guide a church through a transition period, helping it to heal, grow, and prepare for future ministry. They facilitate self-reflection, address lingering issues, and help the congregation clarify its mission and vision. If you could leave this slide up there, please. So, in the last few months, I've been trying to do that. Our call committee certainly, and the congregation as a whole, I think we've been doing some self-reflection. We've been talking to some people who still live in the area, used to worship here, but no longer come, asking them why. Why don't you worship with us anymore? And the answers that we've been getting have been very instructive. We brought Pastor John Cross in here by video on Palm Sunday. You may remember when he talked to us about his little church there in eastern Washington state, a rural congregation, Norwegian-based, and how it is that they're growing, 35 kids in their Sunday school. And then just this last weekend, Pastor Frank Wagner was here, and it was very interesting to me to see our congregation through his new eyes, a different perspective that he was able to bring to me, which I'll share with you today as well. So we've been doing some self-reflecting. I also think we've been addressing some lingering issues. There haven't been many, but there have been a few issues that have needed addressing, and I think we've been doing that. And thanks be to God, moving forward and some healing onto brighter and greener pastures. But what I really want to talk to you about this morning is this last part of the definition, helping the congregation clarify its mission and vision. Last Sunday, after the worship service, a good number of you went downstairs with Pastor Frank for a Q&A session regarding, well, whatever your questions were. But one of the things that Pastor Frank raised, he asked us the question. He said, do we want to be an inward-focused congregation, or do we want to be an outward-focused congregation? Do we want to be an inward-focused congregation or an outward-focused congregation? An inward-focused congregation, he said, is one where we tend the sheep, where we look after each other, where we feed the sheep, but we don't look outside for other sheep, other lambs. We focus on ourselves. This pastor might be called a chaplain. Someone who looks after you well, and there's value in that. Someone who holds your hand during times of stress and illness and grief. Someone who remembers your birthday and attends your graduation parties and is there to baptize and confirm, to marry and to bury. This kind of pastor, this chaplain model, is a good model. But if that's all that this pastor is doing, he or she will be ministering to an ever-decreasing number of people. If we're only looking to care for ourselves, Well, we're going to die. One by one, this group is going to get smaller. This is the chaplain model of a pastor. Then there is the evangelist model for a pastor, the one who is looking out, the one who's looking beyond this congregation. This kind of pastor goes to your kids' basketball games and gets to know everybody who's sitting around him on the bleachers. This kind of pastor is the one who joins the Lions Club and who is the volunteer chaplain for the fire department. This is the kind of pastor who's out there pressing the flesh at different social engagements, different community functions. And this pastor is looking to meet and witness to people not just in this area, but beyond other places in the nation and to the world. Because this pastor sees tending and feeding the lambs, tending and feeding the sheep, as not just this flock, but lambs and sheep beyond the confines of this building, even to around the world. This is the evangelist type pastor. So we've got the chaplain, we've got the chaplain model, one who tends and feeds the lambs and the sheep, and we've got the evangelist model, one who tends and feeds the sheep, but his definition of sheep is much broader. We might say that this pastor has a definition of sheep that is maybe what Jesus would have called our neighbor. You remember when Jesus taught us about our neighbor? He said we're to do two things. The two most important things are to love God and what? Love our neighbor. That's what Jesus said. But he defines neighbor in the parable of the Good Samaritan and others is not just your family, not just people living down the road from you, those in close proximity to you, but our neighbor are those even on the other side of the world, other places in this country. So, tending and feeding the lambs and the flock with a narrower definition, or tending and feeding the sheep with a much broader definition. And so, now, I want to ask you, Denny Johnson, what kind of pastor do you want? Do you want a chaplain, or do you want an evangelist? You said it sounds like it takes two different individuals. Okay? Now, you people who sit in the back think you can avoid me just by sitting in the back. But I'm going to come back here and I'm going to ask Mr. Ben Hill, what kind of pastor do you want? Ben's on our call committee. You want both? Oh, you're kind of greedy. All right. And you people up here think you can escape me, but you can't. Debbie, what kind of pastor are you looking for? Do you want the chaplain or do you want the evangelist? She wants both. She's like you, Ben. Debbie thinks that we should have both. Wow. Denny thinks that there are two individuals. He said, sounds like two individuals. Ben and Debbie said, you want both. Well, Jesus was kind of a both and, wasn't he? He seemed to be able to care for the sheep and the lambs that were in his flock, his little group. But yet certainly he cared for that bigger flock outside of his little circle. Jesus can do both, but can a pastor? Can a pastor do both? I wonder. Now remember, my role as an intentional interim pastor is to help you clarify your mission and vision. That's what I'm seeking to do. What is our vision? What is our mission? To care for those within? To look beyond those within? To beyond? Or both? Now, perhaps I flatter myself, but I'd like to think that I have some of the gifts needed to be a chaplain and some of the gifts needed to be an evangelist. I'm very aware of my limitations, of all the things that I could be doing but am not, because I am not Jesus. I am but a man. But I'd like to think I have some of those characteristics. Let me tell you something. If you want a pastor who is both chaplain and evangelist, you're going to limit your growth. You're going to limit your growth if you expect that man to do it all. You're going to limit your growth. Because let me tell you about my first congregation. My first congregation, Bethany Lutheran Church, in the middle of Wisconsin, located at 6900 Swedish Road, was situated on the corner of a cornfield, just like this one. On my first Sunday there, many years ago, there were 14 people in the pews. By the time I left, almost 7 years later, there were 100 people at worship every Sunday. This little sanctuary only held 75, so we were setting up chairs every Sunday. It was a wonderful thing. But folks, let me tell you, it almost killed me. It almost killed me. Researchers, church growth people will tell you that if you want a pastor who is both chaplain and evangelist, and you want that person to do his or her job well, your growth is going to be limited to about 100 people, 100 sheep, or less. Because one man can't do it all by himself. Can't do it all by himself. This congregation in Wisconsin grew because I felt I had some of these characteristics of both, but my family paid the price. I had 4 kids, which I neglected too much. I can say this now that I'm older. As I look back, I neglected those kids too much, and I neglected my wife too much. I was not a good model for a wife, or for a husband and a father. That congregation, after 6 years, I left. I left because I couldn't do it anymore. It was killing me. I had to find some place, some situation that provided a little more sanity for my life. And I love those people. So, this congregation is already as big as that congregation was when I left. We may not have 100 at worship every Sunday yet, but we have 220 on the books, and a lot of people miss various Sundays. Altogether, we're not a small congregation. We're a middle-sized congregation. To expect a pastor to be both chaplain and evangelist and have this congregation grow is an unrealistic expectation for one pastor. Your Pastor Myers was an exceptional pastor. An exceptional pastor. He grew this congregation fairly single-handedly, I understand, to where we were filled. You shouldn't hold out hopes that you're going to find another Pastor Myers. I think he was one of a kind, a rare bird, and thank God that you had him for all the years that you had him here. But don't have that kind of expectation for your next pastor. It's not going to happen. When I've gone around and visited in your homes, or at a restaurant, or I met with you here at church, I ask you, what do you want Calvary to look like in 5 years? Not a single one of you said, oh, I like it just the way it is. And no one said, I'd like us to be smaller. To a person, every one of you have said, we want this congregation to grow. We want to see these empty pews filled. We want to see this church once again with children and youth and families. We want to be a vibrant, everyone has said that. Folks, I'm here to tell you this morning that if you're looking for a pastor to grow this congregation, and you want him or her to stay alive instead of being buried in that cemetery over there, you've got to look at a different model for ministry. You've got to look at a different way of doing church. Now, you can have a pastor who is the chaplain, and you will love him, and he will love you. But the pool is going to be shrinking, smaller and smaller. You can have a pastor who is an evangelist, but he's going to fail, he's going to falter on the chaplain model if the church grows, because he can't do it all. Pastor Frank, who was here last week, was a very successful pastor. That's why I asked him to come here and talk to us. He pastored a church with 250 people, and then a church with 600 people on a Sunday morning. At his Florida beachside congregation, on an Easter Sunday morning, they'd have a sunrise service with 5,000 people in attendance. The TV stations would be there. It was an incredible thing. He was a pastor for a confirmation program of 250 kids, not just from his church, but from area churches coming together. He was on the board of directors for a Lutheran camp in North Carolina. He led various mission trips to Haiti and other places. How did Frank do that? He brought the gospel to thousands of people, more than I've ever done. He brought the gospel to thousands of people, but he was not the chaplain style of pastor. He recruited other people, volunteers, and additional paid staff to do what he was capable of doing, but knew that if the congregation was to grow, he couldn't. He couldn't be there to hold everyone's hand. He couldn't do that kind of intimate, personal ministry that he might have wanted to do, but if you want to reach more people, can't do. You can only reach maybe 100 or less if you're going to be tending and feeding your flock well. So, what this is all about this morning is I want you to give some thought, some further thought, and some further prayer to who you want as your next pastor. If you want just the chaplain, they're out there. There are a lot of them out there. But folks, you've said you want to grow. And if you want to grow, you need to have more of this kind of pastor. And this kind of pastor who cannot do everything by himself. He's going to have his share of weaknesses, and he identifies those weaknesses, and he delegates in those areas where he can't himself, where he's weak or he just does not have the time. Pastor Frank, you can criticize him for this, but this is what he had to do to keep his sanity. He moved his office to a far corner of the church facility so that people wouldn't be stopping by to chat and interrupting what he was about. Now you can say, that's not a pastor, that's not good. But folks, you can't have both and expect growth to happen. Jesus tells us that we're to take care, to feed the lambs. That's what I believe is happening downstairs this morning. I think Teresa and Heather and Lexi, who are helping her, they are feeding lambs. And I pray that this is the beginning of but a much broader ministry to our children and youth and families. If we want to grow, we've got to be willing to look at a vision that's much bigger and stand behind that vision in all sorts of ways. Impossible? Do you remember what the angel Gabriel said to Mary, the Virgin Mary, when he announced to her that she was pregnant? She's a virgin. She said, how can this be? What did Gabriel say? Nothing is impossible with God. Nothing is impossible with God. And do you remember what Paul said to those Christians at Philippi? He said, I can do all things. How? Through Christ who strengthens me. I love you, folks. If I was a younger man, I'd throw my hat in the ring here. But I'm not. I'm able to do what I do here because, number one, I'm a veteran. This isn't my first rodeo. Number two, you've been helping me in so many different ways. And number three, I don't have family with me. I don't have to worry about sick kids. Even Mary now has gone to tend to Andrew. I'm essentially a single man, so I've got all the time to devote to you. But you don't want someone like me. You want someone younger. You want someone perhaps with a family. You want someone who has the wisdom to realize he can't do it all by himself, and will enlist volunteers and will seek to raise up additional staff people so that we might feed those lambs, tend those sheep, feed those sheep, as Jesus commanded us to do. So I'm going to leave you with a question. Do we, as a congregation, do we have the will? Do we have the determination? Do we have the faith to feed those lambs, tend those sheep, feed those sheep as Jesus would have us do? Do we? Amen. Let's stand.